Just one date, tonight. 5 simple words. But in that moment, inside the Grand Aurora Hotel's royal ballroom, they sounded louder than thunder. The music didn't stop. The chandeliers didn't dim. The champagne didn't stop flowing. And yet, everything froze. Because those words didn't come from just anyone. They came from her. Crystal lights shimmered from the ceiling like captured stars. The marble floor reflected diamonds, silk gowns, polished leather shoes, and the wealth of a city gathered under one roof. Executives laughed politely. Investors exchanged business cards. Cameras flashed near the stage. It was a night designed for power. For influence. $4 billion conversations hidden behind elegant smiles. And standing near the edge of it all was a man who didn't belong. Adrian Blake. His black suit was simple, clean, and carefully pressed. Not designer. Not flashy. Just honest. In his hand, he held something far more valuable than any stock portfolio. His 5-year-old daughter, Lily. She squeezed his fingers tightly, her small blue dress slightly wrinkled from the car ride. Her ribbon leaned to one side, and she kept staring up at the chandelier like it was magic. "Daddy," she whispered softly, "it looks like stars inside." He smiled down at her. "Yeah, sweetheart. It does." He wasn't supposed to be here. He wasn't part of the elite circle swirling around the dance floor. He wasn't an investor. He wasn't an executive. He was a project manager who received a last-minute invitation after his supervisor couldn't attend. He almost didn't come. But Lily had insisted. "You always work," she had said. "Let's go somewhere shiny." So he brought her. Because when you're a single dad, your world doesn't revolve around status. It revolves around the small hand holding yours. Across the ballroom, she stood. Isabella Laurent, CEO of Valion Industries. The woman who turned struggling companies into empires. The one whose decisions moved markets before sunrise. Her silver gown shimmered like liquid moonlight, hugging her frame with effortless elegance. Diamonds rested gently at her collarbone. Her posture was flawless. Her expression composed. She didn't smile unnecessarily. She didn't entertain nonsense. And she certainly didn't date. The media had tried linking her to royalty, tech moguls, heirs of dynasties. She declined them all. Cold. Polite. Untouchable. Rumor said she didn't believe in love. Rumor said emotions were liabilities. Rumor said she was married to her empire. And yet, her eyes were not scanning the investors. They weren't analyzing the board members. They weren't searching for photographers. They were fixed on one place. On him. Adrian felt it before he understood it. That strange sensation of being watched. He glanced up casually. And their eyes met. For a split second, the noise faded. No music. No chatter. Just two strangers separated by wealth, reputation, and expectation. Lily tugged his sleeve. "Daddy." He looked down. "Yes. That pretty lady is staring at you." He coughed lightly. "Don't point, sweetheart." But it was too late. Because Isabella Laurent had already begun walking. Her heels clicked against the marble floor. Each step precise. Each movement controlled. The crowd subtly parted. Conversations slowed mid-sentence. Executives adjusted their jackets. Assistants froze in confusion. Where was she going? Surely toward a foreign investor. Perhaps a senator. Maybe a billionaire tech founder. But no. She was walking toward the man near the buffet table. The one holding a child's hand. Adrian's heartbeat picked up. He glanced behind him once, just to confirm she wasn't headed elsewhere. No. She stopped directly in front of him. Up close, her presence was even stronger. Not intimidating. But powerful. Confident. Unshakable. "Mr. Blake," she said calmly. He blinked in surprise. "Yes." Her eyes held his. Steady. Unwavering. "Would you give me just one date, tonight?" The world didn't explode. It didn't need to. The silence was louder than chaos. Somewhere nearby, A champagne glass slipped from someone's hand and shattered on the floor. Gasps followed. Whispers erupted instantly. Did she just? No way. That's an employee. He has a child. Adrian stared at her, convinced this was a misunderstanding. I think, he said carefully, lowering his voice, you might have mistaken me for someone else. A small smile touched her lips. Not mocking. Not embarrassed. Certain. Oh, she replied softly, I know exactly who you are. The room leaned closer without moving. This wasn't part of the program. This wasn't a publicity stunt. This was unscripted. Lily looked up at Isabella with wide, curious eyes. Are you a princess? A few people nearby inhaled sharply. Adrian crouched slightly. I'm sorry, she doesn't mean. But Isabella surprised him. She bent slightly to Lily's level. No, she said gently. I'm not a princess. Lily studied her carefully. You look like one. And for the first time that evening, Isabella laughed. Soft. Real. Unrehearsed. It wasn't a strategic smile. It wasn't corporate charm. It was human. Several executives exchanged stunned looks. They had never seen that expression before. Adrian straightened slowly, still unsure how to process this moment. Why me? He asked honestly. She looked at him without hesitation. Because you're the only person in this room who hasn't tried to impress me. He frowned slightly. I wasn't trying not to. Exactly. That answer lingered between them. Behind her, whispers grew louder. Public relations teams mentally drafted damage control statements. Investors exchanged worried glances. But Isabella didn't turn around. She didn't acknowledge the noise. Her attention remained entirely on him. You tried to leave early, she continued quietly. To take your daughter home. Adrian shrugged slightly. It's past her bedtime. Most men here would have stayed to network. I'm not most men. She studied him carefully. Not his suit. Not his status. Him. You chose your child over opportunity, she said softly. That tells me everything. He hesitated. I come with responsibility, he replied. Not glamour. Her gaze shifted briefly to Lily. Responsibility isn't a weakness, she said. It's strength. Those words struck deeper than she probably realized. Because too many people had told him otherwise. Single father. Widower. Limited. Complicated. But she saw strength. She extended her hand slightly. One date, she repeated. Tonight. The entire ballroom felt suspended in time. Adrian looked down at Lily. What do you think? Lily smiled brightly. I think she's nice. He looked back at Isabella. And in her eyes, he didn't see calculation. He didn't see strategy. He didn't see a CEO making a bold move. He saw a woman who had everything. And still felt something missing. He exhaled slowly. This won't make sense to anyone here. Her smile deepened faintly. I didn't ask them. A final pause. A final heartbeat. And then. He placed his hand in hers. Firm. Certain. The reaction rippled instantly across the ballroom. Shock. Disbelief. Curiosity. Because in that moment, something unprecedented had happened. A woman who rejected princes and tycoons had chosen a single dad. And everyone watching understood one thing. This wasn't an accident. It wasn't a mistake. It was a choice. And choices like that, they change everything. Fade out. The city glittered beneath them like a field of fallen stars. From the rooftop garden of the Grand Aurora Hotel, the skyline stretched endlessly, glass towers reflecting moonlight, traffic lights flowing like rivers of gold, the distant hum of a city that never truly slept. This space was reserved for VIP guests only. World leaders. Foreign investors. People who moved markets with a single phone call. And tonight, a single father sat there. Adrian rested his hands lightly on the edge of the glass table, trying not to look as out of place as he felt. Soft garden lights glowed around them. A light breeze carried the scent of jasmine from the decorative vines along the railing. Across from him sat Isabella Laurent. No stage lights now. No board members. No cameras. Just her. Without the ballroom's noise, she looked different. Still powerful. Still elegant. But quieter. More human. Adrian exhaled slowly. You don't have to do this, he said honestly. People are watching. He wasn't accusing. He wasn't insecure. He was realistic. Downstairs, hundreds of guests were still processing what they had witnessed. The most powerful CEO in the city had publicly chosen him. Isabella glanced toward the skyline instead of the ballroom below. I've been watched my entire life, she replied calmly. It stopped bothering me years ago. There was no arrogance in her voice. Just truth. He studied her for a moment. But why me? The question wasn't about ego. It was confusion. He wasn't wealthy. He didn't control corporations. He didn't offer political advantage. He offered responsibility. She looked at him carefully. Not at his suit. Not at his status. At him. Because, she said slowly, you didn't look at me like I was a trophy. He frowned slightly. I didn't look at you like anything. A faint smile touched her lips. Exactly. Silence lingered for a moment. Soft. Comfortable. Below them, the ballroom lights shimmered through the glass walls. Faint music drifted upward, distant now like another world entirely. Most men, Isabella continued, approach me like an investment. She leaned back slightly, folding her hands in her lap. They calculate what proximity to me could earn them. Influence. Contracts. Publicity. Power. Her voice remained steady, but something beneath it felt tired. They compliment my company before they compliment me. They admire my empire more than my mind. Adrian listened without interrupting. I didn't approach you at all, he said simply. You tried to leave. He nodded. My daughter has school tomorrow. That answer made her eyes soften slightly. You chose her over networking. He shrugged gently. Being a father is the only title I truly care about. The wind shifted slightly, brushing a strand of her hair across her shoulder. And for just a fraction of a second, something changed in her expression. Not dramatically, but noticeably, like a crack forming in polished glass. Tell me about Lily, she said quietly. The request caught him off guard. People rarely asked about his daughter beyond polite small talk. He hesitated, then smiled faintly. She hates broccoli, he began. But she'll argue like a lawyer if you try to make her eat it. Isabella's lips curved. She believes the moon follows our car home every night. She thinks I don't notice when she sneaks her stuffed rabbit into my briefcase. His voice warmed as he spoke. She still asks about her mom sometimes. Not every day. But on the hard days. Isabella didn't speak. She didn't analyze. She didn't interrupt. She simply listened. For the first time in years, she wasn't calculating risk. She wasn't evaluating strategy. She wasn't predicting outcomes. She was present. Adrian noticed. You're quiet, he said gently. I'm listening, she replied. And she was. The city breeze felt softer now. The distance between them didn't feel as wide. Downstairs, however, the story was exploding. The CEO is dating an employee? He's a widower. He's not even wealthy. Board members whispered urgently near the bar. Assistants checked their phones non-stop. Speculation moved faster than the stock market. But up here, none of it reached them. Adrian leaned back slightly. You know this will cause trouble. Her gaze returned to him. My life has always been trouble, she said calmly. This would just be different. He studied her face. You're not afraid. She considered the question. I'm afraid of wasting time, she admitted. Not of opinion. That honesty surprised him. Powerful people rarely admitted fear. Why ask me in front of everyone? He asked. Because I didn't want it to look like strategy, she replied. If I invited you privately, it would seem calculated. And publicly, it's honest. The simplicity of that answer left him quiet. He looked out at the skyline. When my wife passed, he said slowly, I stopped caring about rooms like that. He gestured faintly toward the ballroom below. None of it felt real anymore. Her expression shifted again. Subtle. Attentive. I didn't come tonight for opportunity, he continued. I came because my daughter wanted to see something beautiful. And did she? Yes. He smiled softly. She thinks you're a princess. That made her laugh again, quieter this time. I've been called many things, she said. Princess isn't one of them. He tilted his head slightly. What have you been called? Ruthless. Calculated. Unapproachable. And are you? She paused. In business? Yes. And in life? She didn't answer immediately. The wind moved between them again. I don't know, she admitted softly. That vulnerability felt heavier than any power statement she'd made all night. Adrian looked at her differently now. Not as a CEO. Not as a symbol. As a woman who had built walls so high she might not know what was outside them. Why tonight? He asked. She met his gaze. Because when I saw you holding her hand, she said quietly, you looked grounded. He blinked. Grounded? You weren't scanning the room. You weren't searching for advantage. You weren't trying to impress anyone. She held his gaze steadily. You looked complete. That word lingered. Complete. He hadn't felt that way in years. And yet, maybe she was right. He didn't have an empire. He didn't have influence. But he had purpose. And purpose was something money couldn't buy. Down below, the music swelled again. The party continued. The gossip intensified. But on that rooftop, something else was forming. Not dramatic. Not explosive. Quiet. Curiosity. For the first time in years, Isabella Laurent felt something she couldn't control. Not admiration. Not strategy. Not ambition. Curiosity. And beneath it, something softer. Something unfamiliar. Hope. She leaned slightly forward. One date, she said again, but this time the words felt different. Less shocking. More sincere. Adrian looked at her carefully. This wasn't about power anymore. It wasn't about spectacle. It was about two very different lives standing at the edge of possibility. You don't bow easily, do you? She asked quietly. He smiled faintly. I bow to my daughter. A pause. And to what matters. For the first time that night, Isabella Laurent felt something steady inside her. Not control. Not dominance. But balance. Maybe that was what she had been searching for. Not someone who chased her power, but someone who didn't fear it. The skyline glittered endlessly behind them. And in that quiet rooftop garden, the most powerful woman in the city realized something unexpected. The man who didn't bow might be the only one strong enough to stand beside her. Fade out. By morning, the world had decided what their story meant. Headlines flooded every screen before sunrise. CEO linked to single father. Romance or reckless decision? Is Valian's reputation at risk? Financial analysts debated it. Lifestyle bloggers sensationalized it. Market commentators speculated about stock volatility. One public moment. One bold invitation. And suddenly, it wasn't a date. It was a crisis. Inside Valion Industries headquarters, tension moved like electricity through glass corridors. Assistants whispered in corners. Phones rang non-stop. Crisis management teams drafted statements that hadn't yet been approved. And at the center of it all, Isabella Laurent walked into the boardroom. The long mahogany table reflected the city skyline through floor-to-ceiling windows. 12 directors sat waiting, their expressions sharp, calculated, uneasy. She took her seat at the head of the table. Composed. Immovable. A senior director adjusted his glasses. Isabella, he began carefully, we need clarification. Her hands folded neatly before her. You have it, she replied. Another director leaned forward. Is this relationship a distraction? The room fell silent. She didn't sigh. She didn't hesitate. No. A murmur moved across the table. Investors are uneasy, someone added sharply. The press is framing this as impulsive. Then the press lacks discipline, she replied calmly. A third director's tone hardened. If this continues, it may affect shareholder confidence. There it was. The real concern. Not love. Not morality. Not ethics. Control. Then end it, the first director insisted. Quietly. Quickly. The air tightened. Isabella's gaze moved slowly from one face to another. Measured. Unshaken. My personal life, she said evenly, is not a shareholder asset. Silence struck harder than any raised voice. One director scoffed softly. Everything about you affects this company. She didn't blink. And everything about this company succeeds because of my leadership. The weight of that truth settled heavily. Valion Industries wasn't fragile. Its growth had been aggressive. Strategic. Unstoppable. Because of her. You built an empire, another board member said more carefully. Don't let emotion weaken it. Her expression cooled slightly. You assume emotion equals weakness. A pause. It does not. No one immediately responded. Because despite the headlines, despite the gossip, Valion's stock had not dropped. In fact, early reports showed minor increases. Public curiosity wasn't panic. It was interest. And interest was powerful. But across the city, another storm brewed. Adrian stood outside Lily's school, feeling eyes on him from every direction. Parents whispered behind polite smiles. Phones lowered quickly when he glanced their way. He heard fragments. That's him. The CEO's boyfriend. Must be nice. He's using her. He kept his focus forward. Lily skipped beside him, unaware of the weight pressing against her father's shoulders. Inside, teachers greeted him differently. Too carefully. Too formally. On his drive home, his phone buzzed repeatedly. Unknown numbers. Missed calls. Messages. And then, a familiar name. His late wife's sister. He answered. Are you serious? Her voice snapped immediately. He remained calm. Yes. Are you using her? She demanded. For money. For status. His jaw tightened. I don't need either. She's powerful. You think this ends well? He didn't answer right away. Because part of him had already asked the same question. Was he stepping into something too large? Too public? Too dangerous? That evening, as Lily colored quietly at the kitchen table, he stood by the window. The city looked different from here. Smaller. Simpler. His apartment wasn't luxurious. But it was warm. It was real. And for a brief moment, he considered walking away. Before the headlines worsened. Before Lily felt the impact. Before Isabella had to choose between love and leadership. He almost called her. Almost said it was better this way. Almost convinced himself that some worlds weren't meant to mix. Then, a knock at the door. Soft. Steady. Not dramatic. He opened it. And there she was. No cameras. No assistants. No corporate armor. Just Isabella. In a simple coat. Minimal makeup. No diamonds. No silver gown. Just her. For a second, neither of them spoke. You didn't have to come, he said quietly. Yes, she replied. I did. Before he could respond, the small sound of hurried footsteps echoed from inside. Lily reached the door first. Her eyes widened instantly. You're the pretty lady. Adrian almost winced. But Isabella laughed softly. And you must be Lily. She crouched slightly to meet her height. Lily nodded proudly. You're on Daddy's phone a lot today. He cleared his throat lightly. Lily. But Isabella smiled gently. That's because your daddy is very interesting. Lily grinned. Daddy makes the best pancakes. Do you want some? The question was innocent. Simple. But it carried something larger. An invitation. Not into a ballroom. Not into status. Into a home. Isabella hesitated for the smallest fraction of a second. And in that second, her carefully maintained CEO mask cracked. She wasn't negotiating contracts. She wasn't answering to directors. She wasn't defending stock prices. She was being invited into a kitchen with mismatched chairs and crayon drawings taped to the fridge. "Yes," she said softly. "I'd like that." Adrian stepped aside. The door closed behind her. And just like that, the world outside faded. Inside, the apartment smelled like syrup and flour. Lily dragged a chair across the floor dramatically. "Sit here." Isabella obeyed. Adrian watched carefully, unsure, hopeful, terrified. Two different worlds stood inside one small kitchen. Pancakes sizzled on the stove. Lily narrated every step like it was a cooking show. "Daddy flips them really high." "I do not," he corrected gently. Isabella smiled, her shoulders relaxing slightly. For the first time all day, no one was questioning her decisions. No one was analyzing her choices. No one was measuring risk. She was simply present. And somehow, that felt more overwhelming than the boardroom. Because vulnerability was riskier than negotiation. As Lily proudly placed a slightly uneven pancake onto Isabella's plate, she beamed. "See? I told you." Isabella looked at the pancake. Then at Adrian. Then back at Lily. "Best presentation I've seen all day," she said warmly. Lily giggled. Adrian met Isabella's gaze. "You don't have to fight everyone," he said quietly once Lily turned back to her crayons. "I'm not fighting," she replied softly. "Yes, you are." A pause. She didn't deny it. "Does it scare you?" he asked. She considered that. "Boardrooms don't scare me," she admitted. "What does?" She glanced toward Lily, who was humming quietly to herself. "This," she said honestly. "Not the gossip. Not the headlines. Not the directors. This. The possibility of wanting something that couldn't be controlled." Adrian stepped closer. "You can still walk away." She met his eyes steadily. "I don't want to." Outside, headlines continued to spread. Investors speculated. Critics analyzed. But inside that small apartment, the storm felt distant. Because for the first time in years, Isabella Laurent wasn't leading an empire. She was sitting at a kitchen table, holding a fork, eating pancakes made by a single dad. And somehow, that felt more dangerous than any merger she had ever signed. Fade out. The board meeting was brutal. Not loud. Not chaotic. But brutal in the way only polished rooms can be. The same long mahogany table. The same skyline stretching beyond the glass walls. But this time, there was no curiosity. No speculation. Only confrontation. 12 directors sat in rigid silence as Isabella Laurent took her seat at the head of the table. No hesitation. No visible fatigue. But the air felt heavier than it ever had before. A senior partner leaned forward, fingers interlocked. "We'll be direct," he said. "If you continue this relationship, we may vote for temporary removal." The words didn't echo. They landed. Deliberate. Calculated. A warning wrapped in corporate language. Around the table, no one smiled. No one softened the blow. They weren't attacking her leadership. They were attacking her choice. Isabella listened without interruption. Without visible emotion. "If the press escalates," another director added, "investor confidence could decline. We cannot tie Valiant's stability to personal unpredictability." Personal unpredictability. That's what they called it. Love reduced to liability. Silence stretched. Then, Isabella stood. Slowly. Deliberately. The movement alone shifted the atmosphere. "If you continue this relationship," the senior partner repeated carefully, "we may vote." She looked at him steadily. "Then vote." The words were calm. Not defensive. Not emotional. Certain. Gasps filled the room. A director to her left shook his head slightly. "You would risk your position, for him?" There it was. The assumption. That this was about a man. About weakness. About distraction. She didn't blink. Yes. The simplicity of the answer unsettled them more than anger would have. One director scoffed quietly. "You built this empire." She nodded once. "I did. And you would jeopardize it." Her gaze sharpened slightly. For years, she said evenly, I built an empire. She paused. But I never built a life. The sentence silenced the room. Because it was true. Her schedule had been relentless. Her focus absolute. She had sacrificed holidays, birthdays, possibility. She had given value on everything. But what had she kept for herself? The board saw numbers. Market share. Expansion charts. She saw something else. Loneliness. A senior partner exhaled slowly. You are asking us to trust your judgment. She met his eyes. You always have. No one spoke for several seconds. Because removing Isabella Laurent would not be simple. She wasn't just the CEO. She was the foundation. The architect. The engine. Finally, she gathered her files calmly. If you decide to vote, she said, I will respect the outcome. A pause. But I will not negotiate my humanity. With that, she walked out. The door closed behind her with quiet finality. And for the first time since headlines broke, the board wasn't sure who held the power. That evening, the city felt different. Darker. Quieter. Isabella stood outside Adrian's apartment building, staring up at the familiar window. This wasn't the first time she had come here. But tonight, something had shifted. She wasn't arriving as a woman curious about possibility. She was arriving as someone who had chosen. She knocked. Adrian opened the door almost immediately. One look at her face. And he knew. What happened? He asked softly. She stepped inside. Closed the door behind her. They want me to choose. He didn't pretend to misunderstand. And she stepped closer. Close enough that the distance between their worlds felt smaller. I already did. The words were steady, but heavy. Adrian's jaw tightened slightly. You don't owe me that. His voice wasn't angry. It was protective. He knew what her position meant. The influence. The responsibility. I'm not doing it for you, she said gently. A beat. I'm doing it for me. Silence filled the room. Not awkward. Not uncertain. Just full. Because this wasn't about rebellion. It wasn't about proving a point. It was about choosing something real over something expected. Adrian looked at her carefully. For years, he had believed love had ended for him. When his wife passed, he buried more than grief. He buried possibility. He convinced himself that his world was small. Simple. Defined by responsibility. He had accepted that. But standing here now, he felt something shift. You could lose everything, he said quietly. She shook her head slightly. No. She held his gaze. I could lose everything that doesn't matter. That answer settled deep. He stepped closer. You're sure? He asked. She didn't hesitate. Yes. The certainty in her voice didn't come from impulse. It came from clarity. Wealth had never frightened her. Competition never intimidated her. But living without connection? That had become unbearable. It was supposed to be one date, he said softly. A faint smile touched her lips. It was. And now? She looked around the apartment. At the simple couch. The drawings on the fridge. The quiet warmth of the space. Now, she said gently, it's something bigger. He exhaled slowly. You don't need to sacrifice your world for mine. Her eyes softened. I'm not sacrificing, she replied. I'm choosing. The distinction mattered. Because sacrifice implied loss. Choice implied power. For the first time in years. She wasn't making a decision based on shareholders. Or headlines. Or strategic advantage. She was choosing based on what felt real. Adrian reached for her hand. Hesitantly at first. As if afraid the moment might break. But when their fingers intertwined, it felt steady. Grounded. One date, he murmured. She nodded faintly. One date. He studied her expression. No regret. No fear. Only resolve. It's not about wealth, he said quietly. Or power. Or status, she finished. He nodded. Maybe it's about courage. A small silence followed. Because courage doesn't always look dramatic. Sometimes, it looks like standing beside someone when walking away would be easier. She stepped closer, her voice softer now. I've negotiated billion-dollar deals without hesitation. A pause. But this. She looked at their joined hands. This is the first decision I've made without calculating the outcome. He tightened his grip slightly. And it feels right. Outside, the city continued its rhythm. Board members drafted contingency plans. Journalists refreshed headlines. Speculation continued. But inside that small apartment, something steady had formed. Not reckless. Not impulsive. Certain. Adrian looked at her one last time as if memorizing the moment. You're not bowing, he said quietly. She smiled faintly. I don't bow. He nodded. Good. Because neither did he. He lifted her hand slightly. One date turned into something bigger. Her smile deepened. Yes. And this time, when he pulled her closer, he didn't let go. Fade out. 6 months later, the headlines had changed. Not disappeared. Changed. Valion Industries breaks profit records. Laurent leads historic expansion. Strategic brilliance continues. The same media that once questioned her judgment now praised her precision. The board never voted. They didn't have to. Because the numbers spoke louder than fear ever could. Quarterly profits exceeded projections. New partnerships formed. Market influence expanded. And something unexpected happened. Investors noticed a shift. Isabella Laurent wasn't distracted. She wasn't weakened. She was sharper. Calmer. More decisive than ever. Because strength didn't fade with love. It grew. The woman who once carried the entire empire alone now carried it with balance. And balance was power. But on this particular Sunday morning, there were no boardrooms. No shareholders. No flashing cameras. Just sunlight. Soft. Golden. Peaceful. Adrian stood in the park with his hands in his pockets, watching Lily run across the grass. She chased pigeons with fearless determination, her laughter echoing freely through the open air. The city skyline rose quietly in the distance, but here, it felt far away. Isabella sat beside him on a simple wooden bench. No silver gown. No diamonds. Just jeans. A light sweater. Her hair gently moved by the breeze. No reporters. No gossip. No speculation. Just 3 people sharing a morning that belonged only to them. Adrian glanced down at her. You know, he said softly, people still think this is temporary. He didn't sound bitter. Just aware. The world still watched. Even if from a distance. She leaned her head lightly against his shoulder. Let them, she replied. There was no tension in her voice. No need to defend. 6 months had taught her something powerful. Public opinion moves quickly. But peace. Peace stays. The first weeks after their decision had not been simple. There had been late-night calls. Press questions. Analysts dissecting every public appearance. Board members observing closely. But Isabella never wavered. And neither did he. They didn't respond to gossip. They didn't perform affection for cameras. They simply lived. And something surprising happened. The noise faded. Because consistency is stronger than controversy. Lily's laughter pulled them from their thoughts. Daddy. Miss Isabella, look. She ran toward them, breathless, cheeks flushed pink from excitement. In her small hand. A wildflower. Not perfect. Not expensive. Just bright and fragile and real. Isabella leaned forward slightly. For me, she asked softly. Lily stopped in front of them, serious now. For both of you, she corrected proudly. Adrian and Isabella exchanged a look. A silent one. The kind that says more than words ever could. That one date had shocked a ballroom. It had shaken executives. It had unsettled investors. But this quiet moment in the park, was something far more powerful. Because it wasn't about spectacle. It was about presence. Isabella knelt down in front of Lily. At eye level. The same way she had done the first night in the apartment. The first pancake. The first invitation into something ordinary and extraordinary at the same time. She accepted the flower carefully. "Thank you," she said sincerely. Lily beamed. "You're staying for lunch, right?" Adrian chuckled softly. "She schedules you now." Isabella smiled. "I noticed. 6 months earlier. She had stood in a boardroom defending her right to choose. Now, she stood in a park being chosen by a child. And somehow, that felt like the greater honor." Adrian watched them quietly. There had been moments when he almost walked away. Moments when fear told him this world was too big, too public, too risky. But she had stepped forward first. She had chosen without hesitation. And that courage had changed him too. "You're different," he said gently once Lily ran off again. She looked up at him. "How?" "Lighter." She considered that. "I am." She didn't deny it. For years, her life had been built on momentum. Always forward. Always upward. Never still. But love didn't slow her. It steadied her. There was a difference. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked quietly. Her answer came without pause. No. Not a flicker of doubt. Because she hadn't lost power. She had gained perspective. The board respected her more now, not less. Her decisions were sharper. Her leadership more grounded. She wasn't fighting to prove anything anymore. She simply knew who she was. Lily ran back again, breathless. "Daddy. Race me." He stood immediately. "Unfair advantage," he teased. "You're old." Isabella laughed softly as Adrian chased after his daughter across the grass. For a moment, she didn't see a single dad. She saw a man who chose joy. Who chose presence. Who never bowed to status or fear. And she realized something quietly profound. The empire she built was impressive. But this small, imperfect, beautiful life was irreplaceable. Adrian returned, slightly out of breath, Lily clinging to his side. "Rematch later," he said dramatically. Lily nodded solemnly before running off again. He sat back down beside Isabella. There was no need for grand declarations. No dramatic speeches. Just shared understanding. She intertwined her fingers with his. "One date," she whispered softly. He looked down at their hands. Then at her. "Best decision of my life," he replied. And this time, there were no board members questioning her. No reporters doubting her. No whispers in crowded ballrooms. Because the only opinion that mattered was the peace she felt sitting on that bench. Love wasn't about who had the most power. It wasn't about wealth. Or influence. Or control. It was about who chose to stay. When walking away would have been easier. And she had chosen. Not the safer option. Not the expected option. She had chosen the single dad. The man who didn't bow. The father who held his daughter's hand in a room full of giants. The one who saw her not as an empire, but as a woman. The wind moved gently through the trees. Sunlight filtered across the grass. And for the first time in years, Isabella Laurent wasn't building something to conquer the world. She was building something to call her own. Fade out. The end.